Welcome to an illuminating exploration of a truly monumental figure in industrial history. When you hear the name Thomas Alva Edison, you probably picture, the light bulb, maybe the phonograph.
Right.
But the sources we've been analyzing reveal a person who was so much more. Less a solitary genius and, well, more the foundational architect of the modern corporate research structure.
That is the key distinction, absolutely. We're looking at a career that's defined by just an astonishing breadth of work. I mean, everything from sound recording and motion pictures all the way to laying the foundation for our entire electric infrastructure.
And it's all evidenced by his, 1,093 U.S. patents?
Exactly. So the mission today is to go beyond that myth of the lone inventor. We want to understand the system, the business acumen, the intense competitive spirit, and just the sheer scale of ambition that really defined this electric titan. He didn't just invent things, he organized invention itself into a machine.
Okay, let's unpack this by starting right at the very beginning, because his origins, they seem to have deeply influenced his character. Edison was born in Milan, Ohio, back in 1847. He was the seventh and final child of Samuel Jr. and Nancy Matthews Elliott, and spent his formative years in Port Huron, Michigan. And you might assume he had this formal, rigorous education, but the sources paint a very different picture.
Completely different. His formal schooling was minimal. It was brief. His mother, Nancy, who was a former school teacher, actually took over his education, covering reading, writing, and basic arithmetic at home.
So she was his entire school, basically.
In a way, yes. But the real engine of his learning, the thing that truly drove him, was self-direction. He devoured books, and this wasn't just, recreational reading. It was focused experimental inquiry. Two influences really stand out here.
Okay.
First, a book called A School Compendium of Natural and Experimental Philosophy. That became his blueprint for understanding basic physics and electrical principles.
So it's almost like a practical guide for a young man who really preferred tinkering over just abstract theorizing.
Precisely. It gave him the foundation to start experimenting with basic chemistry and electricity right there in his family's basement. And the second major intellectual influence was the work of Thomas Paine.
Thomas Paine, really?
Yes, particularly his rationalism. Paine's ideas of scientific deism profoundly shaped Edison's philosophical outlook later in life. It really encouraged him to view the world through a lens of observable nature, rather than pure theology.
And we also need to talk about his famous hearing issues, which developed when he was around 12. He became almost entirely deaf in one ear and severely hearing impaired in the other.
Right. It was attributed initially to scarlet fever and recurring ear infections. And this disability, it became absolutely central to his personal mythology, didn't it?
It seems so.
It absolutely did. As an adult, he framed his deafness not as a limitation, but as a competitive edge. He argued that the lack of auditory distraction allowed him to concentrate more intensely on the endless problems he was trying to solve.
That's fascinating.
And when you look at his relentless work ethic and his demand for absolute focus from his employees, this personal conviction that genius requires isolation from noise, it really colored his entire management style and his whole approach to the creative process.
That relentless focus was paired with an immediate, almost instinctive entrepreneurial drive. Even as a young boy, he wasn't just, running errands. He was building a self-sustaining business model.
That's right. He started as a news butcher on the Grand Trunk Railway line from Port Huron to Detroit. He was selling newspapers, candy, produce, but this wasn't a small side job.
No.
By the age of 13, he was turning a profit of about $50 a week.
Wow, that's a huge sum for the 1860s.
It's an enormous sum. And what did he do with that capital? He invested it right back into his research. He was buying chemicals and equipment for all of his electrical and chemical experiments.
So he formalized that cycle of business funding research before he was even an adult. And he even managed to print his own paper, the Grand Trunk Herald.
Yes, that's another fascinating detail. He used an old printing press he'd set up in the baggage car of the train. The Herald was a genuine newspaper. It ran for 24 issues, reached 500 subscribers, and provided local news to the commuters.
Incredible.
So this early history, it really shows you the confluence of two forces: an insatiable curiosity for science and an immediate ability to organize a business around it. He was a self-funded R&D department long before Menlo Park even existed.
That sets the stage perfectly for his move into the technological center of the 19th century, telegraphy. That's where he truly honed his skills.
Indeed. And his entry into that world was actually thanks to a really dramatic event in 1862. He saved the young son of a station agent from being hit by a runaway boxcar.
And the father was grateful, I imagine.
The grateful father, a man named J.U. Mackenzie, taught Edison how to operate a telegraph key as a reward.
And that instantly gave him a high-demand skill. So he worked night shifts across several states, right, between 1863 and 1869.
Yes, which suited his obsessive nature perfectly. It allowed him to work and study at the same time. He essentially used the quiet, off-peak hours of the night shifts to study qualitative analysis and chemistry.
But this obsessive tinkering, it also led to some trouble.
It did. The sources highlight an incident in Stratford Junction where he negligently fell asleep on the job, which led to a near collision between two trains. He was forced to resign from the Grand Trunk Railway.
And that outcome really pushed him forward, didn't it?
It cemented his decision that he wasn't meant to be an employee, he was meant to be an inventor.
And once he committed to invention, he moved very quickly to patent his ideas. His very first patent, U.S. Patent 90,646, for the electric vote recorder. It was granted in June 1869. But this highlights a critical early business lesson for him.
A brutal but necessary lesson. The vote recorder was designed to tally legislative votes much faster than traditional manual methods. But the politicians, they rejected it.
They didn't want it to be faster.
They didn't want faster voting. They needed the delay inherent in the roll calls to allow for last-minute lobbying and, deal-making. Edison learned that innovation must solve a problem that people are willing to pay for. It can't just be technically superior.
And that realization quickly led him to New York, where he met Franklin Leonard Pope. They formed a company manufacturing machines for telegraph recording.
Pope was instrumental, but Edison quickly overshadowed him. In the late 1860s and early 1870s, Edison was constantly improving upon existing systems, regulating his 50 employees' work and efficiency. This period culminated in one of his first massive financial breakthroughs, the quadruplex telegraph.
Let's slow down on the quadruplex for a second, because this explains how he got the capital for his next big leap. What exactly made this quadruplex system such a valuable technology?
Well, imagine the communication infrastructure of the time was a highway with only one lane. The quadruplex telegraph effectively took that single lane and turned it into 4 simultaneous lanes. It allowed for the transmission of 4 separate messages, 2 going in one direction, 2 going in the opposite, all over a single wire. This was an enormous efficiency leap for telegraph companies. It quadrupled their capacity without laying a single new wire.
And that explains why Western Union was willing to pay him $30,000 for the patent sale in 1874. I mean, that's nearly $1 million in today's currency.
It was. And that was the moment Edison transformed from a jobbing inventor into a capitalist with serious resources.
And it provided the seed capital for the most transformative concept of his entire career, moving beyond individual inventions and toward industrializing the process of invention itself.
Right.
Which brings us to Menlo Park in 1876. This is the true aha moment for modern industry. It wasn't just a bigger workshop, it was the birth of industrial research and development as we understand it today.
Exactly. Located in New Jersey, this facility, which later became so famous the township renamed itself Edison, it was explicitly designed to facilitate the rapid, systematic production of patents. Before Menlo Park, invention was generally a solitary, unpredictable pursuit. Edison made it an organized, controlled, and commercialized process built on teamwork. He called it invention à la carte.
But if we look at the internal culture, it sounds less like a utopian science lab and more like a grueling, high-pressure factory for ideas.
The culture was a direct reflection of Edison's own self-imposed discipline. And his belief, that deftness allowed for superior focus. He drove his staff mercilessly. The sources indicate employees routinely worked extreme hours, often 18 hours a day, sometimes straight through weekends.
18 hours a day.
One worker described reaching the limits of human exhaustion. The expectation was total, relentless dedication to the problem at hand, driven by this belief that effort, systematically applied, always yields results.
And what's fascinating is what the staff had access to in exchange for this exhaustion. The infamous inventory. The sources detail the astonishing range of materials stored there.
The inventory is the physical manifestation of Edison's systematic method. The 1887 inventory included a staggering 8,000 kinds of chemicals, along with every imaginable fastener, cord, and wire.
But it's the bizarre elements that really highlight the exhaustive nature of his empirical method. Things like hair from various animals.
Yes, hogs, camels, deer. shark's teeth, even a peacock's tail.
Why collect all that? I mean, why store camel hair?
The goal was to eliminate all friction in the experimental process. If a problem required testing a new material, say a durable filament, Edison didn't want to wait 3 months for a sample to be shipped. He wanted to reach into a cabinet and grab the necessary material immediately. The inventory was a massive physical buffer against delay. It allowed for instant iteration. It proved that in his system, the testing process itself was the invention.
That systematic approach led directly to the first major breakthroughs that confirmed Menlo Park's value, turning Edison into the wizard. Let's start with the carbon microphone.
Edison took on this challenge in 1876 for Western Union. They were desperate to compete with the new telephone system developed by Alexander Graham Bell.
Right.
Bell's original microphone used a diaphragm and magnetism, which produced a very weak signal. You had to practically yell into the phone. The goal was to amplify that signal.
And Edison, using the Menlo Park method, tested 150 materials to find a solution.
That's the key number, 150. His final innovation centered on carbon granules. When you speak into a carbon microphone, the sound pressure compacts those granules. Carbon is a conductor, and when the granules are compacted, the electrical resistance decreases, allowing a stronger current to flow.
So it modulates a stronger current, which produces a much louder, clearer signal.
Far louder and clearer than Bell's initial design. It's what made the telephone practical for commercial use.
But, as often happened in his career, this innovation was immediately tangled in controversy regarding intellectual property.
Absolutely. 2 years later, in 1878, David Edward Hughes, a respected English scientist, published a paper explaining the fundamental physics of the loose contact carbon microphone. He essentially claimed credit for identifying the semiconductor effect at play.
And Edison was furious.
He was furious. He believed Hughes had been advised by one of his own colleagues, and this pattern of intense rivalry and legal skirmishes surrounding nearly every major patent, well, it became a hallmark of the Edisonian business model.
If the microphone made the telephone practical, the phonograph in 1877 made Edison a household name globally. This was the invention that truly seemed like magic.
It was pure sensation, the idea of recording sound on tinfoil wrapped around a grooved cylinder. It seemed impossible to the public. Joseph Henry, who was the preeminent electrical scientist in the U.S. at the time, hailed Edison as the most ingenious inventor in this country.
What's surprising, though, given its fame, is how long it took him to commercialize it successfully. He patented it in 1878, but basically shelved it for years.
The technology was ahead of the material science. The initial tinfoil model had very limited sound quality, and the needle would quickly wear out the material after just a few plays. Edison got distracted by the electric light challenge, and so the phonograph just languished until 1887.
And when he finally founded the Edison Phonograph Company, the business side was immediately fraught with friction.
Oh, yes. This involved an attempt to create an early monopoly in sound recording, driven by an exploitative investor named Jesse Lippincott. Lippincott tried to form a massive trust that would control both Edison's patents and those of Alexander Graham Bell's company.
And he was trying to do this behind Edison's back.
He used Edison's own personal attorney to try and obscure the true nature of the deal from Edison. When Edison realized he had been manipulated and lost control, he was enraged. That business drama destroyed his friendship with Ezra Gilliland, who had been a key colleague. It was a corporate soap opera driven by trust issues.
How long did it take to resolve?
It took 5 years of intense litigation before Edison regained total control of his company. But here's the fascinating, almost bizarre footnote to the story, especially given the invention itself. Edison's control over the sound produced.
You're referring to his involvement in music selection, despite his profound deafness.
Exactly. Until 1915, Edison personally approved every single record artist and recording based purely on what he, the mostly deaf man, thought sounded good. He prevented the artists' names from being attached to the music sold under the Edison label.
So he treated the recording process itself as a purely mechanical replication.
Right, minimizing the importance of the human artist. It's a remarkable contradiction. The man who brought recorded sound to the world was also the one who heard it least.
That detail perfectly illustrates the tight, often contradictory control he exercised over his domains. From something as world-changing as the phonograph, we now move to his most defining industrial challenge. Section 3. Electrification and the War of the Currents. Edison realized the true money wasn't in inventing a better light bulb, but in designing an entire system for delivering that light.
That's the monumental shift. Incandescent lamps existed before Edison. They had major problems. They either burned out too quickly or they required extremely high current, which made them impractical and expensive for widespread commercial application.
So Edison's innovation was the system.
The system, the durable filament, the standardized voltage, the generators, the wiring, the meters, all of it designed to compete directly with the existing city gas lighting infrastructure.
And the search for that durable filament is one of the most celebrated examples of the Edisonian method of exhaustion.
It was grueling, and he demanded that same systematic rigor from his staff. They started with carbonized cardboard, which failed quickly. They moved on to various grasses, woods, and metals. After testing thousands of possibilities, he ultimately settled on a carbonized bamboo filament.
And that filament provided the durability he needed.
It lasted over 1,200 hours, which made the bulb commercially viable.
And that successful filament design dictated the physics of the entire system, right down to the wall outlets in our homes today.
It forced his hand on voltage. The high-resistance filament he perfected functioned best at around 100 to 110 volts. This voltage standard was a significant leap upward from what competitors were using, but it became the standard for his direct current, or DC, system that still operates today.
With the technology ready, he quickly brought in the financial muscle required to deploy it. He formed the Edison Electric Light Company, backed by some formidable figures.
Oh, yes. J.P. Morgan and members of the Vanderbilt family.
Heavy hitters.
That financial backing allowed for rapid deployment. His first major commercial application came very early, in May 1880. The new steamship Columbia, owned by the Oregon Railroad and Navigation Company, was installed with the complete Edison lighting system. It was a practical, highly visible debut that demonstrated the technology could work on a massive scale.
Deploying the system in New York City, however, presented a unique physical constraint tied to the nature of direct current, specifically the enormous cost of copper wire.
This is a crucial point for understanding the War of the Currents. Direct current loses voltage relatively quickly over distance. So to deliver enough power to a customer 1 mile away, you needed extremely thick, and therefore extremely expensive, copper wires. The infrastructure cost was astronomical.
And Edison recognized this.
He did. And one of his system-level fixes was the invention of the three-prong wire system, which helped minimize the amount of copper needed.
He also tackled the extremely practical but unglamorous challenge of consumption measurement. I mean, how do you bill people for electricity?
He invented a genuinely unique chemical solution, a billing system based on a zinc cell. Customers had a meter containing zinc plates immersed in a solution. As electricity flowed through the meter, the current caused zinc to deposit or dissolve from the plates.
So they would just weigh the plates every month.
Exactly. By weighing the plates, Edison's company could accurately determine the exact amount of current consumed. It was a perfect, self-contained way to meter DC power.
All these innovations culminated on September 4, 1882, with the activation of the Pearl Street Station in New York. This was the moment the electric utility industry was born.
Absolutely. This 600-kilowatt steam-powered generating station started providing 110 volts DC to 946 customers in Lower Manhattan. And what's interesting is how low-key the initial reception was. The light was so steady and reliable, much like the gas lighting it was replacing, that few people even noticed the switch was flipped.
But the significance wasn't lost on everyone.
No, the Boston Globe nailed it. They said Edison had opened night until it shall be his day.
It was a triumph, but one built on a fundamental technological flaw, the restriction of DC.
The limitation was severe and inescapable. Due to voltage loss, a DC generating plant could reliably deliver electricity only about 1 mile, maybe 1.6 kilometers away. This meant DC was only feasible for high-density metropolitan cores. It physically barred Edison from servicing suburbs, small towns, and rural areas.
And this inherent limitation created the opening for the competing technology, alternating current, or AC, championed by George Westinghouse and the Thomson-Houston Electric Company.
AC changed the game because of the transformer. AC power could be stepped up to extremely high voltages for efficient, long-distance transmission over much thinner, cheaper wires. And then it could be stepped back down to a safe, usable voltage at the point of consumption.
It made large, centralized power stations and wide area coverage economically viable.
Exactly.
Edison's response to this technologically superior threat was not one of iteration, but one of dogmatic resistance and, frankly, fear.
He had installed over 100 DC systems globally. The financial sunk cost was enormous. But beyond the money, he also had a genuine concern about safety. AC used much higher voltages than DC, and there had been some high-profile accidents. He weaponized this fear.
He publicly attacked Westinghouse with almost reckless abandon.
He famously stated, "Just as certain as death, Westinghouse will kill a customer within 6 months after he puts in a system of any size."
This escalated quickly past simple business competition into the infamous War of the Currents, a public relations campaign built on smear tactics and fear-mongering.
It was a dark chapter. In 1888, following public concern over electrocutions, Edison collaborated with an anti-AC crusader named Harold P. Brown. They began publicly electrocuting various animals using AC current to demonstrate its lethal nature.
Just to equate the technology with mortal danger.
Yes. And the campaign climaxed with a shocking manipulation involving the development of the electric chair.
Edison saw an opportunity to permanently smear AC.
He colluded with Westinghouse's rival, Thomson Houston, to ensure that the first electric chair adopted by New York State was deliberately powered by a Westinghouse AC generator. The goal was simple: cement the public perception that alternating current was synonymous with execution and death. It was a desperate and manipulative corporate strategy.
That level of intensity tells you everything you need to know about the stakes involved. But eventually, the financial realities forced a consolidation of the industry, and J.P. Morgan got involved.
Morgan was the master of financial engineering. Edison had already lost majority control of his own company after an earlier merger. By 1892, Morgan merged Edison General Electric with Thomson Houston, forming General Electric, or GE.
But the board sided with the Thomson-Houston technology.
They sided with the AC system. They realized it was the long-term, superior economic asset.
So, despite bearing his name, General Electric immediately adopted the rival technology. This left Edison as a figurehead, watching his life's work in DC infrastructure being dismantled.
It was a bitter, monumental defeat. GE immediately controlled 3/4 of the U.S. electrical business, but Edison was marginalized on the board. He privately expressed how aggrieved he was that his company and his patents had been leveraged and then handed over to the competition. He stepped back from the lighting business around 1890, pouring his immense systematic energy into entirely new fields.
That intense energy quickly pivoted to a massive, ambitious, new endeavor, industrial mining. This brings us to the next section, from mining monopolies to medical dangers. The motivation here was that high-grade iron ore was scarce on the East Coast.
Right, and Edison believed he could profitably refine low-grade ore and beach sand using magnetic separation. This project, the Edison Ore Milling Company, was another demonstration of his systems thinking, applied this time to geology and mechanics.
He bought up several mines and constructed an enormous, centralized, highly automated facility in Ogdensburg, New Jersey.
He was attempting to apply the efficiency of Menlo Park to the scale of industrial geology.
And the technological scale sounds just staggering. This wasn't a small team in a lab. This was heavy industry automation.
It was pioneering work in automation. He purchased the largest steam shovel in America at the time. The crushing process was immense. Electrically powered 70-ton rollers rotated at 3,500 feet per minute to crush massive rocks.
And then he used magnets to separate the iron?
An array of 480 electromagnets to separate the fine iron particles from the crushed rock. He even devised a light pneumatic system to remove phosphorus, a contaminant that could ruin steel production.
And he also applied his ingenuity to making the final product efficient for transport.
Yes, the final step was briquetting, forming the ore fines into small, dense bricks for shipment. He innovated this process down to just 2 hours, a massive efficiency improvement. His ultimate goal was total automation, minimizing human involvement.
Given that level of technological mastery and innovation, why was the mining venture such a colossal failure? It risked his entire personal fortune.
It was a combination of astronomical capital investment and just brutal market timing. The cost of building and maintaining that fully automated system was simply too high. When you compound that with falling iron prices globally and the severe economic recession of 1893, the operation rapidly became insolvent.
It must have been devastating for him.
He was unwell with worsening diabetes and had to take a major loan from his father-in-law, Lewis Miller, just to stay solvent. It demonstrates that the genius of a system doesn't guarantee commercial success if the market conditions turn against you.
But the entrepreneur in him couldn't let all that machinery go to waste. He salvaged equipment and immediately pivoted to a completely different venture, the cement industry.
In 1899, he used the materials and the massive rock-crushing equipment from the failed mining venture to establish the Edison Portland Cement Company. He used the waste sand generated by his iron extraction process and focused once again on process innovation.
What was his innovation in cement? A centuries-old industry.
It was all about the kiln. He designed novel 150-foot horizontal kilns. These enormous kilns improved efficiency significantly by cooking the cement material longer, but at a lower temperature, which saved substantial amounts of coal and reduced manual labor.
And this system was successful.
Very successful. He licensed it widely, collecting royalties across America well into the 1920s.
And he attempted to apply this cement technology to solve another systemic problem: affordable housing.
Yes. His ambitious vision was to cast entire 3-story houses from cement in a single mold. The idea was to make cheap, durable housing accessible to the working class. He built some employee housing using this method and ran a major public relations campaign.
But it didn't take off.
The complexity of the molding and the lack of immediate public demand meant he didn't pursue the massive casting project further.
Now, before cement and housing, he was drawn into a brand new, highly exciting, but profoundly dangerous field: X-rays.
Following Wilhelm Röntgen's discovery in 1896, Edison was immediately captivated. He started intense work to develop a better X-ray system, quickly discovering that images displayed far better on calcium tungstate screens. He essentially created the fundamental design of the fluoroscope, which remains in use today.
But this is one of the clearest examples where his relentless, unshielded systematic experimentation came at a horrific human cost.
This is a point that requires reflection and sympathy. Because the dangers of radiation were completely unknown at the time, Edison's method involved intense, hands-on exposure. He and his assistants, Clarence and Charles Daly, acted as human guinea pigs. They would often place their hands and bodies directly in the path of the rays. Edison himself nearly lost his eyesight and had horrific facial burns.
And the tragedy surrounding Clarence Daly is particularly acute.
It is. Edison abandoned the project in 1903, horrified by the damage. Clarence Daly, who bore the brunt of the experimentation, was diagnosed with mediastinal cancer and ultimately died at the incredibly young age of 39 from his injuries. It's a painful reminder that Edison's exhaustion method, which required rapid iteration and total personal commitment, found its sharpest, most regrettable limit when dealing with an invisible, toxic force like radiation.
The shock of Daly's death led to a complete repudiation of the technology from Edison himself.
He was visibly shaken, according to the sources. He stated unequivocally, "Don't talk to me about X-rays. I'm afraid of them." It was a rare moment where fear, born from tragedy, overpowered his relentless desire to invent.
Following that crisis, he committed his energy to yet another long-term, immense challenge: creating a viable, rechargeable battery.
This started in the late 1890s, initially to power his phonographs. But the target quickly shifted to the burgeoning electric car market in the early 1900s. The existing technology, lead-acid batteries, was heavy, inefficient, and protected by competitor patents. Edison wanted a lighter, more efficient alkaline solution.
And he returned to the Menlo Park method, testing thousands of combinations.
10,000 combinations, specifically. He finally settled on a nickel-iron combination using lye as the electrolyte. He patented it in 1901. However, his journey was riddled with setbacks. He faced immediate litigation from a man named Waldemar Jungner, who had a similar design.
And the first production batteries had serious flaws.
They were so deeply flawed, losing power quickly and unpredictably, that in 1904 he had to issue a total recall.
He persevered, though, refining the nickel-iron battery into an efficient and durable final version by 1910. But he completely missed the market window for electric cars.
The timing was cruel. While the battery was technologically sound and highly durable, by 1910, the market was already shifting decisively. Gasoline-powered vehicles were cheaper and had greater range. Electric cars were disappearing, relegated to niche urban use, relying on lead-acid batteries simply for starting the engine.
Despite this commercial failure, his connection to Henry Ford was profound and long-lasting. Ford even lent him substantial financial backing for this battery research.
Ford, who had first met Edison in 1896, was a huge admirer. He was a mentor to Edison in some ways, and he lent him $1.1 million for the battery research. This relationship shows that even when Edison failed commercially, his status as a visionary and systems architect remained undiminished in the eyes of his peers.
That brings us to our next section, where we look at his contributions to entertainment and how the darker side of his competitive spirit played out in the realm of film, alongside his later wartime service.
In 1888, sensing the potential for a visual equivalent to the phonograph, Edison, along with his employee William Kennedy Laurie Dixon, began working on a camera to do for the eye what the phonograph does for the ear. They called the conceptual device the kinetophonograph.
The sources credit Dixon with truly leading the optical and film work, while Edison focused more on the electromechanical control elements. The result was the kinetograph camera, patented in 1897, and the kinetoscope.
Right, the peephole viewing device that was installed in penny arcades starting in 1891.
But the ultimate goal, synchronized sound and motion pictures, proved immensely challenging.
Very difficult. While Dixon produced the first video with sound, the difficulty of keeping sound and video perfectly synchronized outside controlled laboratory conditions led Edison to shelve commercial sound development for years. He focused only on the visual element, the kinetoscope.
And similar to the electric light, Edison's company often relied on others' innovations for the final commercially successful component. He didn't invent the projector that brought his films to mass audiences.
That's a crucial commercial detail. Edison's own attempts at projection failed. So, in 1896, his company manufactured and sold the Vitascope projector, which was actually the invention of Thomas Armot and C. Francis Jenkins. Edison deliberately marketed it as an Edison invention to leverage his famous name and boost sales.
Name recognition over patent integrity.
Essentially, yes.
Despite the origin of the projector, Edison Studios was prolific. It produced nearly 1,200 short films, including classics like The Kiss and The Great Train Robbery. This was pure factory output for entertainment.
It was, and that commercial power allowed him to try and monopolize the nascent industry through the Motion Picture Patents Company in 1908, a trust of 9 major studios. Interestingly, later in life, Edison expressed profound dissatisfaction with where the film industry went.
He felt that the introduction of talkies had spoiled it.
Spoiled everything, were his words. He argued that actors, forced to focus on voice, had forgotten how to act, a sentiment likely amplified by his own lifelong battle with deafness.
We must now revisit the darker side of his competitive legacy, as the War of the Currents found a horrifying expression in the film industry.
Yes, in 1903, the owners of Luna Park in Coney Island announced they planned to publicly execute an elephant named Topsy who had injured a trainer. Edison Manufacturing decided to film this event, creating the short, gruesome film titled Electrocuting an Elephant.
And the purpose of the film was explicitly political, continuing the smear campaign against alternating current.
Precisely. The sources confirm that AC current was specifically chosen and used in the electrocution to demonstrate its lethality. It was corporate propaganda, utilizing the horrific public killing of an animal to reinforce the perception that Westinghouse's technology was dangerous and murderous. It is a moment of profound ethical failure, where the ends of business competition justified unimaginable cruelty.
It's important to remember that victim Topsy used deliberately as a pawn in a power struggle that had nothing to do with her. Moving away from that ethical low point, let's look at Edison's surprisingly focused role in national security during World War I.
He headed the Naval Consulting Board starting in 1915, assembling a committee of scientists and industrialists to advise the U.S. military. Crucially, his involvement was strictly limited by his deep-seated pacifism. He stated, "I am proud of the fact that I never invented weapons to kill."
So he worked exclusively on defensive weapons.
Yes, things like methods for detecting submarines and torpedo protection systems.
However, his championing of his own battery technology for the Navy led to a terrible incident.
The USS E-2 explosion in January 1916. Edison aggressively promoted his nickel-iron battery as a safer alternative for submarines. Lead-acid batteries could leak sulfuric acid, which, when mixed with seawater, generates lethal chlorine gas. Edison argued his batteries were safer.
But his had a different problem.
His nickel-iron batteries generated highly explosive hydrogen gas while being charged. During maintenance in the confined space of the USS E-2, hydrogen accumulated, leading to a massive explosion that killed 5 men.
And naval officials blamed Edison and his associate, Miller Hutchinson, for overselling the battery technology safety for that volatile, confined environment.
It was another instance where his relentless optimism outpaced rigorous safety testing.
Despite that tragedy, the war brought severe shortages, especially of chemicals previously imported from Germany. This forced Edison to pivot his focus to domestic self-sufficiency.
He focused specifically on phenol, a key component for both explosives and common medicines like aspirin. The American chemical industry was primitive at the time.
So when the phenol supply was threatened,
Edison used processes developed by his chemists at his Silver Lake facility. He quickly built 2 plants, starting just 1 month after the beginning of hostilities in Europe, capable of producing 6 tons of phenol per day. He also produced benzene and aniline dyes, previously German imports.
the sources mention a fascinating example of wartime economics. He sold his surplus phenol to the German company Bayer, which then exported it back to Germany.
A truly bizarre wartime loop of global commerce. And his focus on self-sufficiency extended to rubber, too. Given that America consumes 75% of the world's supply, Edison, Ford, and Firestone funded a research lab to find a native source.
And after testing a monumental 17,000 plant samples.
That number alone speaks to the Edisonian method. He identified Leavenworth's goldenrod, which could be bred to yield a 12% latex content. He announced this near the end of 1929.
That systematic, almost manic dedication to the laboratory naturally brings us to our final section, his personal life and underlying philosophy, because the sources make it clear that the lab always came first.
The professional life and personal life were fundamentally imbalanced. His first marriage to Mary Stowell, whom he married at 24 when she was only 16, was characterized by profound neglect. They had 3 children, Marion, Thomas Jr., and William. Mary died young at 29 under tragic circumstances, possibly from a brain tumor or a morphine overdose.
And the strain of being the child of a world-famous yet absent genius took a heavy toll on his eldest son, Thomas Jr.
Thomas Jr.'s story is one of the saddest outcomes of Edison's neglect. He struggled intensely with invention, failing to meet his father's immense shadow, and eventually devolved into a career of selling fraudulent snake oil enterprises, often marketed as the latest Edison discovery.
It became so scandalous that his father had to sue him.
He did. He ultimately agreed to pay him a small $35 weekly allowance, only if Thomas Jr. stopped using the family name for commercial gain. Thomas Jr. struggled with alcoholism and depression for years.
His second marriage to Mina Miller, while perhaps more socially stable, also reflects his controlling nature.
He married Mina when he was 39 and she was 20. She was a socialite and practiced a strict Methodist faith. Nikola Tesla, his great rival, once noted that if Edison had not married a woman of exceptional intelligence who made it the one object of her life to preserve him, he would have died many years ago from consequences of sheer neglect.
So Mina managed his household and social life, essentially protecting him from the demands of the world.
She did, but he delegated nearly all housekeeping and child-rearing to Mina and 5 maids. He was physically present, but emotionally distant.
The one striking exception the sources note is his strange love for the 4th of July.
Right. Because of his deafness, he could feel the powerful vibrations of loud explosions and would make his own fireworks, even adding small amounts of TNT for maximum boom. It was a visceral experience only his disability could fully explain.
Shifting to his philosophical outlook, he was a lifelong Republican, supporting industrial capitalism and tariffs. But his views on certain social issues were ahead of his time.
He was a very strong supporter of women's suffrage, stating in 1915, every woman in this country is going to have the vote. He was a pragmatist about employment, too, hiring women in factory jobs where nimble fingers were required. And, as we noted, his foundational moral stance was pacifism.
On religion, he is often inaccurately labeled as an atheist. The sources clarify this misconception, linking it back to his early influence from Thomas Paine.
He was a free thinker, influenced by scientific deism. While he explicitly rejected the God of the theologians, he clarified that he did not deny a supreme intelligence. He simply called that intelligence nature. He stated, "Nature is what we know. We do not know the gods of religions. No, nature made us. Nature did it all, not the gods of the religions."
That provides crucial context for his later life. He remained active nearly until his death, despite suffering from worsening diabetes.
He was still a public figure and a capitalist symbol. His annual camping trips between 1914 and 1924 with Henry Ford and Harvey Firestone became massive publicity events. They were affectionately called the Vagabonds.
And they functioned as rolling advertisements for their respective companies.
Absolutely. He finally stepped down as president of Thomas A. Edison, Inc. in 1926, handing leadership over to his son, Charles.
But he couldn't resist one final public engineering act, returning to his beloved DC system.
In September 1930, frail but determined, he was at the throttle of the first electric train, a DC system, naturally on the Lackawanna Railroad. He drove the train the first mile through the Hoboken yard. It was a symbolic final hurrah for the technology he always believed in. He died a year later on October 18, 1931, at the age of 84.
And his connection to Henry Ford resulted in one of the strangest scientific mementos in American history.
It's a powerful and peculiar final anecdote. His son Charles had a test tube prepared and sent to Henry Ford, containing air that was considered to be Edison's final breath. It symbolized Edison's lifelong obsession with chemistry and served as a deeply personal gesture between the two industrial giants. That test tube is kept today as a unique memento at the Henry Ford Museum.
That anecdote truly encapsulates the blend of science, commerce, and myth surrounding the man. As we conclude this in-depth analysis of Thomas Edison's life, we see him as far more than just the inventor.
We must remember him as the creator of the modern industrial laboratory. He pioneered the transition from solitary genius to systematic, commercialized teamwork. We tracked his consistent application of systems thinking, whether designing the entire electric grid or attempting to automate industrial mining.
And we also documented the immense competitive ferocity he brought to the War of the Currents and the intense personal costs of his relentless pursuit of innovation.
From the tragic, unshielded exposure that killed Clarence Daly to the profound neglect of his own family, the costs were high.
The triumphs are undeniable, but so is the complexity and the high cost of his ambition. It makes him one of the most fascinating figures of the Gilded Age.
For a final thought, we want to leave you with something to consider further that brings together his professional focus and his personal affliction. Think about Edison's lifelong belief that his profound deafness enabled greater concentration, driving his singular focus and his rigid, controlling management style.
How did this inability to fully perceive or appreciate sound ultimately limit the potential of his greatest sound inventions, the phonograph and the kinetophone?
It raises a profound question. Did his physical isolation from the world of noise ultimately prevent him from realizing a complete picture of his own sound-based innovations, particularly in the artistic and synchronization challenges of early motion pictures and music marketing? Did genius in this case require a degree of isolation that inadvertently limited the very inventions he was trying to perfect?
A truly thought-provoking way to look at the legacy of the Wizard of Menlo Park.
Oh, indeed.
Thanks for listening.